Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to take a look at a really compelling explanation of what's holding our entire global economy together.
So, here's a huge question for you. What is it? Is it international trade? Maybe it's just good old-fashioned trust? Well, the source material we're digging into today suggests it's something, well, a lot more intense than that.
There it is, a shared fear of the whole system just collapsing. The source basically argues that the economy is like a giant Jenga tower, and everybody's afraid that if they pull the wrong block, the entire thing is going to come crashing down for everyone. It's a system that's held together not by confidence, but by this idea of mutually assured financial destruction. So, how on earth did we get here?
Well, the source material kicks things off with a pretty powerful metaphor to describe a certain style of leadership and economic policy. It calls this first part the emperor's new debt.
Yeah, so the idea here is a leadership that just keeps spending and spending, almost like the consequences aren't real. It's treating the entire national treasury like it's a personal, no-limit credit card. And all that spending has racked up a bill that is, honestly, hard to even comprehend. $39 trillion. I mean, just look at all those zeros. It's a number so huge it feels fake, right? But the source is clear. This debt is very, very real. And it's actually the foundation for the whole financial house of cards we're about to look at.
Which brings us to our next chapter. How does that debt shape the world's financial system? The source uses another great visual for this one. It compares the whole thing to a sandcastle. So let's do a super quick history lesson. Back in 1944, under a system called Bretton Woods, the US dollar was actually backed by physical gold. Simple enough. But then in 1971, that all changed. The gold standard was abandoned, and we entered what the source calls Bretton Woods 2. This is a whole new game where the dollar isn't backed by gold, but by something else.
And this really spells out the difference. We went from a system built on a tangible thing, gold, to a system built on power. Today, the dollar is king because critical things like oil are priced in dollars. And it's all propped up by financial and military dominance. There's no written treaty for this. It's just this unspoken understanding that challenging the system could trigger a global meltdown.
But, sandcastles don't last forever, especially when the tide's coming in, and the source points to some serious cracks starting to appear. The big one is something called de-dollarization. You've got major countries like the BRICS nations actively trying to trade in other currencies, trying to move away from their reliance on the dollar.
Okay, so the financial system feels a bit shaky, but the source argues that's only half the story. To really get it, you have to look past the money and at the actual physical stuff, the hidden wires that keep civilization plugged in.
Take a look at this number, 50%. What could that possibly be? It's something that is absolutely essential for about half of us to even be alive. Yep, half of the entire world's population eats because of synthetic fertilizers. And where do those come from? Fossil fuels. This creates a direct, unbreakable link between the energy market and the food on your table. And it's just one of these weak points we never really think about.
And there are more. Our whole agricultural system is hooked on these fertilizers. Global trade depends on stuff moving through tiny little bottlenecks, like the Strait of Hormuz. And get this, 96% of all manufactured goods need petrochemicals to be made. We're talking about plastics, everything. These aren't just numbers on a screen. These are real, physical choke points.
So why is this a big deal? Because if any of these chains break, it's not just the stock market problem. The source warns it could lead to calorie shocks, that's a sanitized way of saying food shortages, and diesel prices so high that the farmers and truckers who get us our food simply can't afford to operate.
And that brings us to the final and maybe the biggest pressure point that the source identifies. It's a kind of debt that's fundamentally different from that $39 trillion we saw earlier. This one you can't get out of.
The source has a great name for it, physical debt. It's not a debt to a bank, it's a debt to the laws of physics. You can't print more money to solve a warming ocean. You can't default on the laws of biology. This is the one bill that always, always comes due.
And yet, the approach described is what the source brilliantly calls the ostrich strategy. Just burying our heads in the sand. We're chasing oil and gas for energy security, but in doing so, we're actively damaging the very biological foundation, the clean air, the stable climate, that our economy and we need to survive. It's a total contradiction.
So you've got this massive debt, a fragile dollar system built on a sandcastle, all these hidden physical wires, and a massive, unpayable climate bill. How do you put all of that together?
Well, believe it or not, the source material ties it all up in a single satirical cartoon.
Let's just walk through it. So you've got the Emperor character standing on that melting sandcastle we talked about, the Bretton Woods 2 system. And what's he doing? He's using that giant $39 trillion debt, drawn as a credit card, as a shovel to dig the hole he's in even deeper. And rolling in are these three monster tsunamis: de-dollarization, the climate crisis, and supply shocks. Meanwhile, way off in the distance, someone's just watching, because they know you can't stop the tide.
And that's really the genius of it. This isn't just some funny drawing. It's a diagram of the entire system described in the source. It perfectly connects the leadership style, the financial debt, the fragility of our supply chains, and those massive, unavoidable forces of nature that are looming.
So, at the end of the day, the source has painted this incredible picture of a global economy that looks a lot like a magnificent sandcastle. It's complex, it's impressive, but it's built on sand. And that leaves us all with one final, really unsettling question. What happens when the tide actually comes in?